Distinguished experts, delegates, and participants, good afternoon, good evening, good morning. A very warm welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining our session on trade in circularity, perspectives of developing and transition economies. It's a session organized jointly by UNECE and IEEP, the Institute for European Environmental Policy, and CITRA, the Finnish Innovation Fund. And it's my great pleasure that we can do this here together and have this session as part of the Trade and Sustainability Hub of the International Institute for Sustainable Development, IISD. And I would really like to thank them and also the technical support from Worldly Wise for doing such an excellent job in preparing this event. My name is Elisabeth Türk. I'm the director of UNECE's Economic Cooperation and Trade Division, and it will be my pleasure to run you through the event. And before we get into the substance, let me share a few housekeeping remarks. So to our audience, please do use the chat function here on the Zoom platform to ask questions, either to the panelists or to all of us. I will be monitoring the chat and the channel as well. And I will be happy to sort of like also bring some of the questions or points to the attention of the speakers during the session. Second important remark for everybody, please note that this session is being recorded. Now, as I already said, I'm a great pleasure to join and co-host this session here together on behalf of UNECE. UNECE is one of the UN's 5 regional economic commissions, Economic Commission for Europe, and we have 56 member states spanning 3 continents, North America, Europe, and Asia, and notably Central Asia. We also have 17 beneficiary countries. We call them program countries. And this is mainly countries with economies in transition. And they are in Central Asia, Southern Caucasus, Western Balkan, and Eastern Europe. In spring 2021, in April, our membership, our 56 member countries, they devoted their 69th Commission session to the topic of circular economy. And they committed to stepping up efforts towards circularity. And they called upon the different UNECE sub-programs to look into options to mainstream circularity into their work. And that also applies to our work program on trade and economic cooperation. And that's why I'm particularly pleased that we can co-host today's session and that I can moderate today's session, and that we will dive into the topic of circularity and trade and hear experiences from countries all around the world. Now, as the circularity transition spreads around the globe, the practicalities of a new economic order come to the forefront, and trade can really be a connector and enabler, and trade can help us to scale up circularity. It can help us to move from a linear economic model to a circular economic model. There are lots of emerging policy ideas, such as circular product policies, transparency and traceability along international supply chains, circular infrastructure, just to mention a few. They can all be crucial accelerators to our transition to circularities. There are some important specific priority sectors, such as waste or textiles, but ultimately the move towards circularity and sustainability will really span many different areas of economic opportunities. Now, circular economy can offer opportunities. However, we also really need to be aware of the challenges that can come along. And we need to minimize the challenges. We need to maximize the synergies. And there are important synergies between trade and circular economy. And today it's really an opportunity to hear about what we can do to maximize these synergies, and to also hear from country-specific experiences and to see what can we do to ensure that circular economy doesn't turn into a barrier to trade, but rather opens up opportunities for trade. And this is particularly important for countries that are developing countries and countries that have economies in transition. And this is also particularly important for micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. In other words, this is really important for the smaller and more vulnerable players in our global economy. We need to make sure that we leave no one behind. And it's for that reason that we really look forward today to look at sharing best practices and experiences, and to hear from different actors, and to really zoom into what can be done to harness the power of trade for circular economy for developing countries and for countries with economies in transition. With this, I'm delighted we have a wonderful panel lined up. We have a stellar panel lined up. And here I have listed first Mr. Antoine Auger from the Institute for European Environmental Policies, IEEP. And here, Antoine, my real great appreciation to you and to IEEP for being a co-organizer of the session. And so I greatly appreciate this. Joining us from Albania, a country with an economy in transition, we have Ms. Nertila Buka from the Ministry of Finance and Economy from the Republic of Albania. Joining us from Africa, from Nigeria, we have Dr. Fasabe from Lagos State Environmental Protection Agency. Welcome, Dr. Fasabe. Joining us from Uzbekistan, Central Asia, we have Mr. Ilkom Kadirov from Uzbek Textile Prom. And joining us, I guess, from Geneva, from the International Trade Center, we have Ms. Sarah Mohan. So I'm really delighted that we have all these experts from different parts of the world bringing different perspectives to our discussion, and we'll basically proceed in 2 rounds of interventions. We'll first have some 5 to 6 minutes per speaker, and that should be the time for each of you to give us an overview and to make your initial intervention. And during that time, we will also be monitoring the chat to come back to that in a second round of questions or interventions before we then will hear some closing remarks. So with that, let us go right into the substance of the debate. And I welcome our first speaker, Antoine Auger from IEEP. And as I mentioned before, Antoine, he's also our co-organizer for the session. And Antoine, you're heading the Global Challenges and SDG team at IEEP, and you're also a specialist in the provision of trade-related technical assistance to developing countries. So really like top spot on the issue. And Antoine, my question to you would be, what can be the role of trade policy initiatives, and maybe particularly those initiatives by the EU in supporting a circular economy transition? You know, we've heard a lot about for example, circular product policies, about standards, about supply chain traceability and the like. So if you can share a little bit of light, what can be their role and what can be possible entry points for a sustainable circular trade policy in the context of the global recovery. With this, Antoine, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, and hi everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today. It's a great honor for me as representative of the IEP, who has a chance to, as you said, to co-organize this particular session on trade and circularity, as we all understand that this is a crucial subject to be tackled at the moment. Without further ado, I would like to dive into the subject, as you mentioned, the trade policy opportunities, and in particular the EU trade policy opportunities to foster circular economy globally. And I will also then focus on developing economy and even more focusing on Nigeria as a specific case example, because at the moment, this is a research work that we are doing at IEP with CITRA on a case study specifically on that particular subject on how trade can foster circular economy in the relation between EU and Nigeria. So I will try and cover all this ground in a few minutes. So I will have to dive into the subject if you allow me. So when talking about the EU circular economies, the first thing that jumped into mind, of course, is the adoption of the EU Circular Economy Action Plan that has been adopted last year in the early 2020, which is considered to be the most significant circular economy policy to date among globally, as it outlines a number of key issues. It outlines the sustainable product policy framework, which means a gradual phasing of EU domestic circular economy standards. And I guess with Mr. Mohan, we'll get into that a little bit more into detail, what these standards can entail. This plan targets also key value chains with great potential for circularity. We mentioned here we have electronics, batteries, plastic and packaging, obviously. We have textiles, constructions, and so on. It also, the action plan, the EU action plan, proposes these global cooperation measures, such as the establishment of a global circular economy alliance. It proposes a more integrated partnership with Africa. This is what we'll be talking into more details. And trade-related measures, specifically trade-related measures, such as the inclusion of new circular economy objectives in the future EU trade agreement, free trade agreements. although we will see that there's still some progress to be made on that particular subject. So what can be the role of the EU trade policy initiatives in supporting circular economy transition? So as we know, the effects of circular economy related domestic policies or bilateral agreements are undoubtedly bound to spill over, affecting trade flows and consequently socio-economic development at a global scale, whether it's on our production and consumption patterns, whether it's on the materials, goods, and services that we trade. Some concrete examples would be the current regulation on waste shipping by the EU with a very recent revised proposal to curb EU exports of waste, in particular to non-OECD countries. We could talk about the regulations on production processes with the upcoming EU Sustainable Product Initiative. They will try to upscale the circular economy standards for products that are imported in the EU. Or we could also mention, for instance, the trade in secondary resources to insensitize the markets for secondary raw material by pushing for better harmonization of rules which would apply to waste, for instance, to waste or spent goods. And so as these key value chains and others, of course, are targeted by these new sustainability standards under this Circular Economy Action Plan, the EU intends to seek partnerships to lead the charge by envisaging this trade policy framework for businesses to innovate and trade with new circular markets. In that respect, circular economy, of course, has enormous potential in the EU trade relations, especially with Africa. And yet some progresses are needed at all levels. So, for instance, when we look at Africa in general, there's been some progress in the past years. When we look, for instance, at the Guiding Vision Africa 2063, when circular economy was only addressed indirectly through topics like climate change, adaptation, and sustainable development. Now the attention has focused on circular economy principles with the creation of the African Circular Economy Alliance in 2017, and is now clearly mentioned as key for the transition to a sustainable economic model in the most recent EC communication on the Africa-EU cooperation. We hope that this will translate into concrete measures to be adopted by ministers at the next EU-Africa summit, which we hope to be organized in the early months of 2022. This summit has been already postponed a few times, unfortunately. I've mentioned some progress to be made because, for instance, and this is true at all levels, because, for instance, at the multilateral levels, unfortunately, we see that the ministerial conference in C12 had to be postponed. We know also, of course, that the environmental goods agreements that could also be a good way towards supporting circular economy. Discussions are quite frozen at the moment. Yet there are some good news with the very recent, for instance, inclusion of China and US in the trade environmental sustainability structure discussion that will prove a massive impetus for circular economy principles to be included into trade relations at the multilateral levels. At the bilateral level for the EU, as I've mentioned, through the FTAs, at the moment only 3 agreements FTA actually mention circular economy with Australia, New Zealand, and Mexico. And these agreements are not yet in the implementation. They are either being negotiated or under ratification. And that's it. Yeah, this is just being mentioned. There's no concrete policy attached to fostering circular economy through bilateral agreements yet. So this is absolutely a progress that the EU should make. And of course, in terms of autonomous measures, we see that the EU is moving. We have mentioned the waste shipment regulations. I've mentioned the new Sustainable Product Initiative. So there's been some movement on that. Now, if you allow me, I've mentioned briefly the cooperation with Africa in that regard with developing economies. I will not dive into details for circular economy aspects in Nigeria because Dr. Fasawe, who will come later in the discussion, will cover that much better than I could. But I would still mention through the research work that we've just undertook, I would just like to highlight 3 concrete examples of how trade relations between the EU and Nigeria could foster circular economy. There's 3 different sectors. The first one will be in agriculture. There is a massive production of agri-waste in Nigeria at the moment. There's biomass, there's harvest waste and food waste. And of course, there's also massive potential to convert this waste into energy and fertilizers, for instance. So technology for such conversion exists but are barely available in Nigeria at the moment. So this sector is a huge opportunity for scaling up, notably through technologies transfer, for instance, machinery and the like, trading machinery and the like from the EU for this type of conversion activities. I would, of course, like to mention packaging and plastic packaging, as this is a major challenge for Nigeria, as it is for many other countries around the world. Nigeria is currently developing an action roadmap on the matter and a financing strategy to foster circular economy for plastic. And the country recently joined the Global Plastic Action Partnership in 2021. So there's been some progress on that as well. And I would like to end on the textile issue, when Western Africa plays an important role as an export market for second-hand textiles from the EU, with, for instance, Nigeria, Ghana, and Cameroon being among the top 6 countries for EU exports of such products, second-hand products. This is also a sector with massive opportunities when trade relations can actually support the transition to circular economies. I will stop there for the moment, and please, of course, available to answer any particular question on everything that's been mentioned, and then we can come back to closing remarks. Thank you so much.
Many thanks, Antoine. Really comprehensive overview, and you have started us off with the EU Circular Economy Action Plan, and then really given us some glimpses of sort of like key policies in the area of waste shipment, production policies, trade and secondary material. I really enjoyed how you identified areas where progress remains to be made at the multilateral level, bilateral, and also looking a little bit at what is happening already at the domestic actions of the EU. And thank you for pointing out the trade and environmental sustainability structured discussion document. And as we can see, co-sponsors are growing, the number of co-sponsors are growing, so I think that's encouraging. And Antoine, thank you for then zooming into the potential that you see in terms of harnessing the power of trade for circularity in Africa. Key sectors, agriculture, packaging, textiles, all, I think, lots of material and thought for further discussion. Now, before we turn to our speaker from Africa, we stay a little bit closer in the region and we turn to Albania, and let's see whether we manage to connect Ms. Nertila Boka, who is joining us from the government of Albania. And Ms. Nertila Boka is a specialist of trade affairs in the Economic Development Policies Directorate of the Ministry of Finance and Economy in Albania. And Nertila, she is also from the UNECE side, a focal point for our recently launched United Nations Development Account project on accelerating the transition towards circular economy in the UNECE region. So Nertila, you are joining us from a country with an economy in transition. And my question to you is, what roles can governments play in promoting circularity, and more specifically, what has been the experience of Albania? And also, what are the needs of the countries in the region, in the Western Balkans? So Nertila, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Elizabeth. It's a great pleasure to meet you again. Hello, everyone. My name is Nertila Boka, and as Elizabeth mentioned, I'm a specialist in the trade division in the Ministry of Finance and Economy in Albania. I was recently appointed as focal point of Albania in the UNECE, and I'm very pleased to be here today, sharing some of our achievements, but also a lot of challenges that we face working toward the circular economy. Albania is very interested to circular economy, and we have taken some steps forward toward it, and many others are in the process. Still, a lot of work is yet to be done. Let me start with some of the achievements, and later on we can discuss on the challenges. Albania amended the public procurement law, which entered in force in March 2021. This amended law contains provisions for the promotion and encouragement of innovation, including procurement procedures through the innovation partnership procedures. These procedures are in line with the provision of the European Union directives. Albanian public procurement law promotes sustainable procurement through the implementation of criteria provided by environmental, social, and labor legislation and ratified international agreements and conventions. Some of the aim topics of the law are the use of the quality assurance standards and environmental management standards, including the use of criteria and specification aimed to green economy. Social procurement, providing for the first time in our country the concept of reserved contracts, which provides a simplified procurement regime for social services and other specific services. The use of the most favorable offer as a standard evaluation criteria through which it is intended to guarantee value in the fields by obtaining products with better quality and more favorable prices. Till now, in our country, we're applying the best price. So in the procurement process, the best offer with the best price was the winning one. But now we aim to achieve better products by raising the standards in the specifications and in the criteria in our public procurement procedures. At November last year, the prime ministers of the 6 Western Balkans gathered and signed the Western Balkan Declaration on the Green Agenda. Through this statement, it was agreed to engage in the implementation of concrete steps in 5 areas, such as the climate, energy and mobility, the circular economy, reduction of pollution, sustainable agriculture and food production, and biodiversity. Albania is engaged in the process of transition from a linear economy to a circular one. In order to contribute to the protection and the minimization of waste in the 6 Western Balkan countries, we anticipate taking the following steps. Integration of our supply chain into the European Union supply chain by improving the sustainability of raw materials production. It is important for us to focus in the value chain, applying an approach to the industrial ecosystem in the region to guarantee the renewal of the environment. We also anticipate to develop the circular economy strategies by evaluating the entire life of the product. The prevention and management of recycling waste. We also, very important topic is raising public awareness on waste treatment, because in our opinion, this is where all should be starting, by raising the public awareness, and the implementation of regional agreements for the prevention of plastic pollution, etc. I am very happy to share with you that Albania has joined several initiatives and statements by co-sponsoring them, such as the draft statement on trade and environmental sustainability, the draft ministerial statement on plastic pollution and environmentally sustainable plastic trade, and the draft ministerial statement of fossil fuel subsidies. This was for my minister to present to the 12th ministerial conference, which was postponed, unfortunately, but I'm sharing with you today and very happy to do so. Albania also welcomes the UNECE projects on circular economy and points out that these initiatives are also quite challenging for us as a small and developing country. Sharing experiences and stories of success from the developed countries is essential for us to understand better what is left to do. Our country needs support on addressing trade-related capacity building and technical and financial assistance, as it is also needs measures to support the implementation of actions required toward the circular economy. We would be happy to be more involved in the circular economy projects and discussions where we can address our issues and challenges and also gain from the best experiences and best examples. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Nertila, also for this very comprehensive overview. And as you mentioned from Albania, you've shared with us some steps that have been taken, and you've noted that some steps still remain to be done. I found particularly interesting what you said on public procurement and innovation. And indeed, innovation clearly is needed to move from a linear to a circular economy. And procurement can be an important lever, a drive for change. So we'll definitely be monitoring what will be happening there. I also found it very inspiring that you told us about the regional dimension, the Western Balkans Green Agenda Declaration. So it's encouraging to see that also the region as such is moving in that direction. And you zoomed into waste, importance of supply chains, and excited to hear that Albania has signed on to many of the relevant ministerial statements that have been in preparation, and surely will be delighted to work with you and the country also on the UNECE side. And I think here it's really important to flag what you said, the importance of sharing of experiences, between countries as we are all embarking on these new challenges, and the importance also of technical assistance and support. so that everybody can be brought on board. So many thanks, Nertila, for sharing all of this. And now, having looked at Albania, we now do move to Africa, and let me see whether we can connect our third speaker, Dr. Fasabe, who will be joining us from Lagos State Environmental Protection Agency. And Dr. Fasabe is the General Manager of Lagos State Environmental Protection Agency. And I understand, Dr. Fasabe, you're responsible for the implementation of policies aimed at protecting and improving the environment in Lagos. And you're also one of the foremost experts in Nigeria on exploring that nexus between public health and the environment, and also really looking at this in the context of cities. We know that cities are sort of like a really important actor or driver in this regard. So welcome, thank you for joining us. And I hope you will tell us now a little bit what specifically are the needs of developing countries, and how do SMEs experience international trade in a circular economy framework, and also if you want to share with us what support could help promoting circularity in business. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and I'm so glad to be here. I'm speaking from a West African perspective because obviously South Africa has gained some traction over West Africa in discussing circular economy. Right now in Nigeria, I would say we're just transitioning from a linear way of doing things into a circular way of doing things. And the biggest challenge we have is education and advocacy. Being in environmental protection, our mantra here, superimposed on circular economy, is people, planet, profitability. Is it good for the people? Is it affordable for the people? Does it make the planet happy? Is it environmentally sustainable? And is it bankable? Is it profitable? Is it, can we duplicate it? Can we replicate it? Can it go on its own? So LASEPA is that agency of government that protects both the air, the water, and the land, and waste, the way waste is treated in Lagos. So I started thinking of health impact analysis and economic impact analysis of the environment. And I did realize that there's a very, very big connection. For example, in waste management, everybody's waste in circular economy is somebody's raw material. We tend to want to buy, use, dispose. That is what we are used to. That is what we have learned. But now that we're preaching circularity, scientists, I'm a medical doctor, and I like data, I like science to prove that circular economy gives us smarter outputs, smarter outcomes. It makes us more efficient. And I'll just give a little story. Bakeries. We have a lot of small enterprises rural women who bake, and a lot of them burn fossil fuel. We start to introduce gas to them slowly, first hybrid, then gas, and telling them, give us your waste and leftover. We would give it to people to generate power for you. That way, they're not buying power, they're producing more bread, and they're more efficient. However, without us physically going there to incentivize and make these things happen, it wouldn't happen. Where am I going? Advocacy, advocacy, advocacy. Information, education, not only education, communication. Because we find out that in government, we talk at people. We make policies and say, this is it, do this. We're moving from linear to secular. We need to do renewable energy. We need to. The challenge is people do not understand what we are talking about in the Western Hemisphere, in this side of Sub-Saharan Africa. If I would ask for any support, if I would ask for any technical support, really, it would be in the form of education and dialogue. It's amazing the things we learn from just dialoguing, getting feedback, and say, oh, what you're saying is interesting. I cannot do it because of XYZ. And the government has the solution to XYZ. It is not always financial. At times, it may just be political will, technical support, or some incentives, tax cuts, for instance. That was how I won bakeries from burning fossil fuel. We started giving them tax cuts. And steel recycling industries is another example. In Nigeria, we're one of the biggest steel recycling economies in the west of Africa. And you can imagine how much energy is put into steel recycling. However, there's an informal sector where people just pick scraps on the road, and these guys don't standardize, formalize, just collect the scraps, give them a few pennies and say, go back out there. Now we're trying to come up with a formal model that is circular. We're also trying to make producers take responsibility. It's called Extended Producers Responsibility Law. If you produce something from inception, from conceptualization to implementation to actually getting this cup out there, you have to think of its end life and think circular. It's difficult to announce this on TV or continue talking like this. We have to show it. And we have to walk the talk. So my experience here with environmental management and being a medical doctor, even the health impacts of practicing a linear economy is crazy. Because the way we manage our wastes, air pollution occurs. 68%, a World Bank study that I took part in showed us that 68% of deaths in a certain part of Lagos was premature. It was due to air pollution. Air pollution from what? Burning waste. This waste can be somebody else's raw material when we start to think of circularity. But people don't know, they can't do what they don't know. They want the easiest way out. It may not be the cheapest way out, but it is a norm. So my appeal to this group is let's think of more sensitization, advocacy, and case studies show that this has worked in Europe, in Finland, I'm battling plastic pollution now, and I've studied models all over the world. If you come to Lagos, right on the streets, there are plastic bottles every day. Yet, this is wealth, but nobody understands the concept of recycling. So we go back to the producer and say, it is your responsibility to see this thing you have produced to its end life. And really, there's no end life in circularity, especially with non-biodegradable stuff like plastic. Every plastic that has been produced in the world is hanging somewhere. But if we start thinking circular and teaching, not only thinking, and not only talking, teaching and showing circular, I think we would jump up the step in matching up with the European countries like yours. Thank you.
Many thanks, Dr. Fasada, for these inspiring remarks and for this positive conclusion in terms of like jumping up the stairs. Now, you've really shown us the West African perspective and the sub-regional perspective to the topic, and you've emphasized how you're just starting to transition from a linear to a more circular economy with that concrete examples of plastic bottles in the streets and no awareness of recycling. But you've also flagged the recognition of the fact that somebody's waste is somebody else's raw material and given us some very concrete examples of like how this is already being put in practice in your country. And you've mentioned the challenge, the important challenge of the informal sector. And I would say a key takeaway message from your intervention really was that it's not only about policy, but it's really about creating change and the importance of raising awareness, education, and sharing of experiences. And I think here is where the different work streams, be it in international organizations or be it also in organizations and discussions on the ground can come in, have to come in to raise that awareness and to empower and inspire people to act change and not only sort of like to read about change, but to act change. So many thanks for that, Dr. Fasade. Let me now move from West Africa to Central Asia and let us move to Dr. Ilkom Kadirov, who is the chairman of Uztextilprom Association. And Mr. Kadirov, you are joining us from Uzbekistan, from a country with an economy in transition, from a country that is in the steps of becoming a member to the WTO. And Mr. Kadirov, you have, before becoming chairman of Uzbek Textilprom, you've served in many important government positions in the Ministry of Foreign Economic Relations, in the Cabinet of Ministers, and also as ambassadors to the Benelux countries and as the Uzbek ambassador to Ukraine. So Dr. Kadirov, lots of interesting experience to share, and I would ask you to talk a little bit about the specific needs of countries with economies in transitions. How do SMEs experience international trade in the circular economy framework, particularly from the perspective of the textile sector? And what do you think, what type of support also would help? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And it is very encouraging introduction. I believe I will sustain. And if you would allow me, I will pick up from very promising statement of you that circularity is not a barrier, but encouraging instrument for developing countries or the countries in transition. I will start. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome all the participants of the event dedicated to circular in trade. And I would like to express my sincere gratitude to organizers, especially for hosting me here. I would like to share my vision and experience of little success story in Uzbekistan, which is the only country for the last years which managed to transfer its entire cotton crop of 1 million ton to textile. And it would be, I would be open for any suggestion and proposal. And it would be, for us, it is more important thing. I've heard very carefully statement of my colleague from Africa, from Nigeria, and it is very much encouraging. To live my own experience in practical cotton trade and in textile would give me little opportunities. Today, I'm going to speak about how concept of sustainability and traceability and green economy and cotton value chain have been introduced in the textile and garment industry, and the current condition of circularity, or to move to this direction in Uzbekistan. You might remember Uzbekistan as having a long history in weaving artisanal textile, or you might know our country as one of the produced and export cotton. But today I would like to introduce you to a modern Uzbekistan. Textile industry in the country is the second largest manufacturing industry, representing more than 7,000 textile enterprises, small and medium, big, with a state-of-the-art technology and the value chain that runs from the production of fiber to manufacturing of finished product. As an industry that has grown several-fold in the past few years and expected to reach $3 billion in export by end of this year, with a fully transparent manufacturing chain capable of converting 100% of our harvested cotton into highest quality textile product. What makes us a little different? We managed to achieve fully transparent value chain. The location of Uzbekistan, we could consider as our competitive advantages. We are right between Asia and Europe. On April 10th, Uzbekistan acquires the status of GSP Plus beneficiary, which implies zero duties when exporting to EU countries. Also, we have free trade zone across the CIS. And as I mentioned before, we have a great cotton nowadays, including organic cotton. Being one of the largest cotton producers in the world and emerge as a successful textile hub, Uzbekistan has to play in all its particularities. Progress reaching sustainability comes in line with the promotion of best practice that key actors in global textile and garment trade has been implementing successfully. Since 2017, the practical achievement of sustainable production mechanism started to play a main role in Uzbekistan by creating fundamentally new so-called cluster models where cycles began from cotton growing and finish with the trade in garment. Such achievement and advantages boosted increase of textile export to biggest international markets, including EU. Furthermore, they facilitate establishing new collaboration in global trade and integration to international value chain. Being unique scheme in the world when textile industry went upstream and bring industrial approach and modern innovation to agriculture, cluster model enables textile mill to secure quality and quantity at predictable price. This is very important mark. Secondly, it provides due diligence services. For example, there is a law in Germany requiring providing compliance for delivered products at every step of its production. I would say every step of our so-called perfect production chain reached perfections like resource efficiency in spinning, automation and human factor reduction in weaving, quality compliances in garmenting, and finally 100% capacity utilization and cost efficiency. I believe there are a number of opportunities, and today's session shows it, that with the circularity in environmental, economic, and social terms in cotton textile sector of Uzbekistan. We have taken direct actions for setting in place the regeneration of cotton, pre-production and post-production, which returns from the customer, waste utilization. I've heard few remarks about plastic, but you should know that the garment can be, especially as a waste, can be reutilized. And we are planning to achieve those targets with the support, including technical support from UNEC. In agriculture side, we started widely utilization of water-saving technology, especially using drip and pivot irrigation, as well as mechanization. Alongside with this, we have achieved significant progress in water treatment technologies and renewable source of energy, which are not only rational and economically profitable, but perhaps the way to become a green industry. Uzbekistan, with its climatic condition and geographic location, with the warm and sun rains all over the year, has a huge potential in the field of solar energy. And this year, in 2021, we introduced first fully solar energy plant. As a conclusion, I would say that there is still a long journey to make trade in circularity sustainable for us. We would say biggest consuming markets like Europe might play a crucial role in there through stimulating or supporting developing economies in this direction. Thanking you for your attention. We would like to invite you to Uzbekistan, maybe mid-March next year, when we will be making with UNEC special workshop on this theme. Thank you.
Many thanks, Mr. Kadyrov, for sharing perspective from Uzbekistan and specifically focusing on the cotton and textile sector. And as you mentioned, long journey is still ahead, but there is already a lot of significant things happening. And you described very well to us how Uzbekistan's textile sector is moving from an artisanal to a modern one, and a modern one where really by taking a cluster approach, one can move towards more circularity. And that can be in terms of resource efficiency in input, water, energy, solar energy you mentioned, And also in terms of making supply chains more traceable. And I'm delighted that from the UNECE side, we can work with you in this regard in terms of ensuring sustainability and traceability of supply chains. So many thanks for joining us with this particular perspective. Now we are moving back to Geneva to our fifth speaker, Ms. Sarah Mohan from ITC, International Trade Center. And Sarah is an associate program officer with ITC's SME competitiveness survey team. And Sarah, you have published several peer-reviewed articles, policy papers, and also chapters in books on the important topic of standards, sustainability, and value chains in developing countries. So it's a great pleasure to have you with us. And Sarah, if you can talk to us a little bit about what are the experiences of different countries around the world and what can be done to encourage rather than hinder these circular value chains and trade that we are trying to promote. Sarah, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think we look around the world, what we see is that there are a lot of opportunities offered by the circular transition for small and medium-sized enterprises or SMEs. Firstly, waste that's normally generated in the process of production can be reintegrated into production or sold. This eliminates the need to pay for disposal and it generates new revenue streams. So here at the International Trade Center, ITC, we worked with Interlinge, which is a Moroccan textiles and clothing producer. And based on that work, they established a dedicated waste room in its factory, which had different bins to separate wastes. They then launched zero waste and reusable products such as makeup remover wipes that are reusable. And this generated about $11,000 US due to the sale of material that would otherwise go to waste. At the same time, we're seeing that using renewable and recycled inputs can also cut costs and make the company more resilient because the price of recycled inputs fluctuates less than in virgin commodity supply chains. So Juliet Namuju, who is the founder of Kamuli Fashionability in Uganda, makes clothing and accessories from recycled plastics. These inputs help with the plastic waste crisis in Africa, but she also says that it helps to save on expenses because she doesn't have to pay for the plastic. And it also opens up markets with environmentally conscious buyers. By offering to fix broken products, manufacturing businesses can strengthen their relationships with clients as well. And when they encourage clients to return items that have reached the end of their first stage of life, the firm obtains information about the wear and tear of their products that helps them design their products better the next time around. The company can also refurbish returned products and sell them on secondhand markets or use parts to produce a new item. So we also see that there are these new revenue streams that are coming from things that would normally have been viewed as waste in a linear economy. And last but not least, there's an increase in demand for support services for the circular economy. So this is repair services and environmental consultants. And this is really seeing a huge increase as circular models gain speed. And we can see these opportunities in the data. So ITC interviewed 1,359 companies in sub-Saharan Africa. And we found that 42% of them were reducing their environmental footprint. For example, through waste management systems, recyclable packaging, and other circular techniques. Now, of those who said that they were reducing their footprint, about 59% of them said that these reductions offered them business opportunities. So for example, 17% said it generated access to new markets, 10% said that going green lowered their input costs, as an example I mentioned before, and 7% said it generated new products. So this is good news, but of course the flip side of 59% is 41. So those 41% indicates that not all green opportunities are lucrative yet. And so we see that policies are needed, including in the trade arena, to catalyze the green transition at the SME level. Notably by creating export and import opportunities that improve incentives for the green transition amongst SMEs in developing countries. One could take, for example, the creation of a tariff line for products made out of recycled cloth and lowering tariffs on such a tariff line. Or reducing the barriers to movement of people who provide circular services so that you can have more exchange of knowledge south to south on research and on techniques that are essential to the circular transition. But we need standards and inclusive ones to know what are these circular products and services. And we know that every development in a political economy in history, from the creation of the nation state to globalization, has been accompanied by standardization. A long time ago now, Napoleon created a standard coin for exchange within his empire. More recently, the logistics industry created the standard container size to ship things across continents. Now, the creation of the circular economy is really in its infancy, but we can already see that there are some early attempts at standardizing what is circular and how it can be facilitated. So the European Committee for Standardization's Working Group 11 is looking into plastics recycling, and in particular looking at limits to the permitted levels of recycled content in different products, and whether those maximum permitted levels can be relaxed somewhat. In France, AFNOR has the Circular Economy Project Management Guide, and the ISO Technical Committee 323 on the circular economy is making strides at an international level. There's standard 59010, which is under development, which helpfully has a framework for measuring circularity as well. Closer to home here, the European Commission Sustainable Product Policy Framework aims to create a comprehensive framework to ensure the sustainability of all products sold in the EU. And early indications show that it's going to include some reference to the highest sustainability standards for the reuse and recycled content in products, particularly in the electronics, ICT, and textiles sectors. And this is important at a government level, as has been mentioned by one of my panelists here. ITC is working with the city of Malmö in Sweden in the context of Malmö's climate transition efforts concerning its sustainable public procurement policies to identify and address sustainability risks for the sourcing of batteries, notably for e-vehicles. And I think most indications are that this movement towards circular standards is really going to get started in the field of machinery and electronics. Batteries, for example, are quite energy intensive to make. So circular standards to ensure that they can be used over and over and over again are very much welcome. But in that context, we don't have many standards so far to define what is circular. Without this kind of clarity, the concept will be diluted and may only be relevant to those insiders who are trusted to deliver on circularity. Standards build trust. So we really have to start now in developing trustworthy, transparent, and inclusive standards for circularity. And as we do so, we can learn some of the lessons that the sustainability standards movement has learned. In the commodity field, we have some 70 years now of hard-won lessons on how to include developing countries, small businesses in the standardization and trade world. And some of those lessons learned from sustainability standards for circular standards include the following. One is that it's essential that circular goods be recognized as such in schemes that are affordable and responsive to the information and operational needs of SMEs in developing countries. So to take just one example that was mentioned once in committee recently at the WTO, waste pickers in Pakistan. We need to know what is circular and what is not. And this is a foundational issue, and it has to be addressed before trade and product policy can treat such products differently. We know from sustainability certification, for example, in forestry, that group certification schemes are essential to the inclusion of smallholders. So collective mobilization, for example, through cooperatives or extension networks, significantly increase the benefits from certification amongst fresh fruit and vegetable farmers in Thailand. Building on that, communities of practice amongst those seeking and those obtaining circular certifications can help boost capacity, innovation, and marketing prowess. So for this reason, ITC has created Green to Compete hubs, which I'll mention again later. Another very important theme you'll hear again and again in the certification world is that it's important to avoid certification fatigue and duplication. So in this context, we need to look at harmonization of circular standards, benchmarking, and mutual recognition. So ITC has collaborated with the Social and Labor Convergence Program to engage about 45% of the global fashion industry through a converged assessment framework, or CAF. And ITC is maintaining a gateway for this initiative through which participants can share mechanisms for verified assessments. The credibility of standards is also key, and I would not be surprised if this came up in our discussions in the years ahead. The independence of verification, the oversight of auditors, and no conflict of interest. This is quite important for standard setting. And I know the impact investing world is really grappling with these issues as well in the context of their standard setting efforts. More recently on the standards landscape, we've been talking about taking a more systemic approach, recognizing that standards for circularity or another objective may affect non-target aspects of the environment and livelihoods. So we need to gather data in different ways to triangulate the overall effect that initiatives have on well-being in the communities concerned. Now, also important in other standards efforts have been chain of control measures. So this is about making sure that inputs travel along, that what you get that's certified was originally the certified product. We have HACCP rules, for example, in the phytosanitary world. In a circular context, we could envisage, for example, using blockchain technology to certify whether a product has been made in part or in full using previously used inputs. So to go back to my example from Juliet, she could get certification from her plastic waste supplier so that she can guarantee to buyers that her output includes a certain amount of recycled content. This could, one could imagine, dovetail with public regulations, for example, in the EU product policy mandatory recycled content requirements. But as this example shows, the design of the measures used to define and track the fulfillment of circular requirements should include SMEs in developing countries in the development of such measures to ensure that it aligns with the operational conditions of developing countries and to ensure that these circular standards and trade include SMEs in developing countries rather than exclude them. Thank you.
Many thanks, Sarah, and for closing with that important point that ensuring that standards can support inclusion of SMEs in circular global value chains rather than exclude them. But you really did us a tour d'horizon of lots of different things. And I think your first point was really the importance of the business case for circular economy transition. And you've pointed to the economic benefits that can arise in terms of opening markets, making supply chains more resilient, or going also into services sectors, which is moving away from only goods into the services economy. And then you noted that really policies are needed, and we've discussed tariff lines, new tariff lines. We've discussed services and trade, and then you really zoomed into standards again. And I guess, yes, indeed, standards are important for building trust, but there's also lots of challenges relating to standards if they are not harmonized or there are too many standards, questions related to certification, metrology, quality assurance, and all of this. And I'm delighted to see that the ITC is also working on that. And we last week had our working party 6 on regulatory cooperation and standardization, where we precisely looked into also the role of standards for circular economy. So delighted to see that we are very much on the same track here. Now, with that, we've done a wonderful first round of interventions, and we have some 15 minutes or so left. I understand we are at the last session of the day, but we don't want to overstretch time on our audience's side. But I would now invite speakers for a very brief second round of interventions. And as you do so, please do have a look at the chat. And we have 2 comments here. We have one comment that is really about also the importance of plans and programs of support for stimulating stakeholder engagement, and really how can we support that there is stakeholder engagement also of those stakeholders who have concerns. And I think that's important really to bring them in as well. So there is one question around that. And the second question, Sarah, is specifically addressed to do about the harmonization of standards, whether that's possible for barriers or what that means. So with this in mind, I'm now giving the floor back to our speakers. And Antoine, maybe I take you last because you will also be making some concluding remarks. And we now go by the order of the other speakers. So that would mean Nertila, Dr. Fasave, Mr. Kadirov, and then Sarah. And we'll try to keep it all together in 15 minutes, yeah? So Nertila, is there something additional you would wish to share in a brief concluding remark? Let's see whether we can bring Nertila back. If not, then let's see whether we can bring Dr. Fasab. Yeah,
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes?
Okay, no, thank you very much. I followed all the discussions and they were very interesting. I would like to notice that I share the same issues with the African group about sharing the experiences and to do a lot of education on what this circular economy is and how can we apply it with what we have in each country. To me, I'm more pleased to hear than to share because we need a lot of help to implement and to do what needs to be done. So thank you very much for the opportunities and I'm looking forward for further developments.
Thank you, Nertila, for these remarks. And let us move from Albania to Western Africa and see whether we can get Dr. Fasabe back on the screen.
She's here, she's here. I liked Sarah's talk, which was very similar to what I said. And going back to the grassroots, bottom-up approach is the way to go. So I second Sarah, and that would be my closing statements.
Thank you, Dr. Fasabe. That was short and punchy. You saved us some time here and very to the point. Let us move to Mr. Khairarov.
Yeah, thank you very much. I was fascinated with all these talks, especially the last one about how we could implement all this thing. But I really expressed my concern because we are a beneficiary, and you have to know that moving towards circularity, especially in trade, it requires some investment, capital investment. And we have to see that the gain would be not only on modality, but also in physical thing. For example, we are ready to implement already. We started implementing waste utilization, pre-production waste utilization, and we are using so-called regenerated cotton and regenerated polyester for our production chain. And we see that international brands are ready to support this kind of thing. So we would like to see that international fora, including these participants, would be ready to provide some a concrete mechanism for developing for countries in transition, so that we could move much faster towards this circularity, and especially, and as it was said, that we have to introduce standards, what we are calling circularity, and we have to use those standards, and it has to be equalized in all parts of the world. Thank you very much, and I will be keep in touch with all participants, I hope, for future negotiations. Thank you.
Many thanks, Mr. Khairarov. And you made that very important point, yeah, that moving towards circularity requires investment, and we need to make sure that that investment is flowing to the places where it's needed. And basically, we have to find the ways for financing the circular economy transition. And that's maybe also a call for us in the different international agencies to pick up on that topic and look at investing and financing the circular economy transition. Now, you also picked up on the important topic of standards. And let me hear, as we are moving to Sara, and I think, Sara, you will help us bring some of these pieces together. Let me point out to you that we do have another comment in the chat, which really points us to this challenge of whether circular economy standards and requirements could actually put additional burdens on companies in developing countries or countries with economies in transition. So, Sara, if you maybe can zoom into that question of, is there a challenge? What are the burdens? A little bit, and then I noted we also bring back Dr. Fasabe before we then move to Antoine for the closing. So, Sara.
Yes, no, it's an interesting question. I mean, whenever there's a new trend in the regulatory and international space, this is my first question: is it going to add another burden? And I've seen at a field level that developing country producers often see this as a new set of demands. But the circular framework has been always kind of funny for me because it's something that's been done in developing countries for a long time. You don't waste things as much when you can't afford to toss them out after one usage. So for me, actually, I see this as a field where developing country producers have a natural advantage. It's just a matter of recognizing them as such. And this relates to the other question about harmonization of standards. Would it create barriers that would reduce the flexibility of developing countries? I don't think so. I think I would assume quite the opposite. I think that mutual recognition of standards can reduce costs and allow increased trade. So to take one example, I was interviewing a producer once, and they took out 6 different certification schemes that they'd been certified to, and each one cost them quite a lot and was stressful to obtain. And then, of course, each of those certification schemes had to go through the government, so there were government actors who had to spend a lot of money and time figuring out all these schemes. When you have mutual recognition schemes and or harmonization, you lose less in what we economists call transaction costs. So I think from a producer perspective, it's sometimes better maybe to start with local standards that are really appropriate to the circumstance. But then when you go global, to have 1 or 2 mutually recognized standards that that reduce how many times you have to get certified. So I would say that more than anything else, it can reduce the costs of being sustainable when those sustainability standards are harmonized or aligned with one another. And this relates again to the barrier issue. We need some recognition of the standards that are relevant for developing countries. But I also wanted to extend this mutual admiration society to Dr. Fasawa in concurring with her that knowledge is a key barrier for SMEs incorporating the circular economy into their business processes. So SMEs need to see the business case behind the circular economy. How does it help them become more competitive? We have to highlight the gains in terms of new revenue streams, lower costs, new market information, and provide technical assistance and financing that helps them make that jump. So ITC's Green to Compete initiative is helping small businesses develop a competitive advantage by going circular through capacity building and linking them with actors in their business ecosystem that can help them innovate and save money and get new markets. So to take one example, there's been some calls for examples. In Uganda, we connected an international coffee expert to some coffee wet mills there. And one of our beneficiary companies, the Mountain Harvest Company in Uganda, enhanced their pulp composting practices and they're now starting to commercialize their composted coffee pulp as fertilizer. So it's all about transforming wastes into new market streams that also generate opportunities for other businesses. But yeah, there's a lot of learning that needs to be done, and it's often between businesses and between governments in the South. And along those lines, I just wanted to highlight that we've just launched this week a new online course on ITC's SME Trade Academy for small businesses and those that support them that helps SMEs learn about how to go circular. So feel free to access it. It's available for free online. Thank you.
Many thanks, Sarah, and also for zooming in a little bit on that question of harmonization. Indeed, it can help by avoiding the multiplicity of different standards and certification needs. But as you also emphasized, there is really the question how to enable the local producers to meet these standards in the first place. Skills, technology, innovation, and investment, as we heard before, very much is needed. Now, let us bring back Dr. Fasawa for a quick second round, as you mentioned. Please go ahead, and then we move to Antoine for the closing. But we cannot hear you at the moment.
You're muted.
Dr. Fasawa, you're still muted.
You're muted again.
Now.
Yeah, seems.
That's good. You're muted again.
Yeah, seems.
Now?
That's good.
Yes. I want to make, Sarah seems to be reading my mind. I'm going back to what the ambassador put in there. And it is true. We have had that experience here. At times, circularity makes the consumer pay for the concept. When I say people, planet, profit, the burden must not be put on the people and the consumer. That is the ambassador's challenge, and we are facing it here. Now, I will give you just a little example. Recycled jeans. That's why I followed Sarah. New fashion, recycled fashion. Why would a recycled pair of jeans into a rucksack cost more than a regular rucksack on the street? That's what circularity does. How do we tackle this? My question or my comment is following the ambassador's comment up there. It's a problem I'm facing here, and people shy away from circularity because of the extra costs it puts on the consumer. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Fasabe. So, leaving us with a question to think about more, unless any of our speaker wants to come back on that point in particular. I'm looking at the different icons in my screen. If not, I would now move to Antoine for the closing. And Antoine, I'm not going to make your life easier, but if you look at the chat, there is a question to you, a very specific question about whether the EU is going to be more forceful in future FTAs with regards to the inclusion of circularity. And I think you mentioned that there are already references to circular economy in some of the EU FTAs. Where do you think this is going? So maybe you can rope this in. And if not, I would say the fact that we do have some open questions for future discussion also points us to the importance of continuing this dialogue. But first, Antoine, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Thank you all for these amazing discussions. Thank you, Dr. Fasabe, Sarah, ambassadors, for these exchanges. I think this was really the point, and it shows that people are passionate about this particular issue of circular economy. I will get to the EU FTAs aspect in a second, but I would just wanted to remind and reinforce the points made by Dr. Fasabe and supported by Nertila and Sarah as well on the importance of raising awareness around circular economy and stakeholder engagements as well. As I'm going to define here, this circular economy is a concept that is infusing in the global discussions, is relatively new in infusing into global discussions. And so I think we're seeing here is the need for more efforts at every level. Good. We have trade and circular economy principles that provide massive opportunities and challenges at all levels, in all sectors. We've mentioned agriculture, we've mentioned electronics, plastics, waste. This needs to be tackled in a holistic way, and that includes policy development. So I've mentioned the EU Circular Economy Action Plan. There's one that is being developed at the moment at the African level. There's one that is being developed in Nigeria as well, action plan, to maintain this holistic approach of circular economy related policy development. Now, we've wanted also to mention that this, in terms of policy development, is well and good to have a kind of policy framework in which to implement our activities related to circular economies. But also, Sarah and Dr. Fasabe mentioned the issue of profitability in this kind of circular economy value chain that are yet to be reinforced, to be confirmed. I think it was 41% that you mentioned, Sarah. So we're not there yet to ensuring profitability into this value chain, or to making people aware that profitability is there at the very least, and there are opportunities. So, of course, I also have to mention this enforcement and implementation levels of circular economy related policies and activities still very significantly and often insufficiently developed, because many countries face major issues in terms of capacity, awareness, as I said, to try to go towards that transition. We've mentioned as well that the EU is moving forward in its autonomous and domestic circular economy policies. could have a potential detrimental effect countries, especially countries that are export dependent, or to the MSMEs, of course, as we said, who could be facing higher sustainability standards as well as capacity issues. However, as Sarah mentioned, there's another face to that coin, where toward mutual recognition schemes, harmonization agreements could actually transform these potential challenges into actual opportunities for specific MSMEs that manage to trade into that particular area. So I will a quick word on the EU FTAs, as it was a specific question. Yes, indeed, it's a declaration of intention at the moment for the EU. It states that it will foster circular economy through its free trade agreements in the future. But as I said, it's a new concept. It's a new concept. It's not a new concept. It's a concept that is infusing more and more into the conversation. And now we see it appearing in free trade agreements of the EU, but really rather as a general principle aspects. It's difficult to find concrete measures supported by the free trade agreements by the EU, negotiated by the EU on circular economy. So this is an ongoing process. And we very much hope IEP will continue monitoring the EU free trade agreement negotiation processes to ensure that, and to try and support the fact that circular economy processes are there. Because this is one way. EU FTA, EU bilateral is one way for circular economy principles, business models to be implemented globally. But also, so this is part of trade policy, but also I wanted to mention the cooperation policy of the EU. These trade and cooperation policies are key to address the challenges. So we now see that circular economy is getting more and more into the conversation. We see that it has more and more traction, but we see that there are massive challenges. And again, I'm going to end on this raising awareness issue that has been defended so passionately, in that there are opportunities there, and now we need to make people aware, and people and MSMEs and every stakeholder aware that they are there, so that we can get them. And I'm going to stop there. We're a few minutes late, but thank you very much for bearing with us all this time. Thank you so much to Elizabeth for this for co-organizing this event, to our wonderful speaker. Thank you to IASD, of course, the organizers, for these 3 days of sessions that I think are extremely interesting for all of us to follow. And I thank you all very much for being there. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Many thanks, Antoine, and for these inspiring closing remarks. And I very much agree, there are opportunities and there are challenges, and that's maybe why it's so important that international organizations and also different think tanks look at the issue of circularity. And I'm delighted that at UNECE we do that have that high up on our list of priorities right now and for the month and years to come. And at the same time, as you mentioned, Antoine, when we want to move from a world that is wired for linearity towards one that is really circular, it requires change of each individual of us. And so there comes this contribution and agreement with this plea for awareness raising and discussion, debate, and education. So with that, many thanks also from my side to all our speakers from the different countries, Albania, Nigeria, Uzbekistan, and from Brussels and from Geneva. It was a wonderful occasion to have you with us. And I hope that we can continue this discussion in many other forums in the near future. So with that, a nice evening and a nice remaining day to everybody. And do stay tuned for the IISD Trade and Sustainability Hub. There is a lot of interesting sessions lined up for tomorrow. Thank you very much and goodbye.